Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. This is Peanut. He's deciding to sit in on this one, at least for a little bit. He happens to be awake today. Now, when it comes to retirement and money, most retirees have two goals. One, that is to be able to withdraw enough money today in order to cover their expenses. Two, the other is to leave enough money invested so that it can grow and generate future income so that they'll be able to withdraw money, 5, 10, or even 20 years into retirement. When it comes to managing your money for retirement, it is part art and part science, and there is no shortage of retirement withdrawal strategies. The most predominant one that most people know about is the rule of 4%. However, there is one that is coming onto the scene, becoming increasingly popular, and that is the 3-bucket strategy. So what is the 3-bucket strategy? The way the 3-bucket strategy is set up is that you have 3 distinct account types or buckets to withdraw money from in your retirement years. You could aptly name these buckets the now, the soon, and the later bucket. The now bucket is money that you're going to need in the next 2 years or so. So this would include all of your daily living expenses, think gas and groceries, utilities, any vacations you're planning on taking in that time frame, or even any foreseeable home repairs. Like for example, if your home needs a new roof in the next year or two, you're gonna wanna put it in this bucket as well. Now this money is going to be held in cash or cash-like equivalents. Think like a money market account. The goal of the money in this bucket is not to make money, but rather to ensure that you have money on hand regardless of what the market is doing. As we all know, the market can behave quite erratically with wild swings up as well as down. And while retirees are certainly going to be celebrating when the market goes up, it can be quite troublesome when the market takes quite a downturn and you still have to make a withdrawal in order to cover your daily living expenses. So having this now bucket makes it so that you don't immediately have to touch your portfolio should it suffer from a downturn. The next bucket is your soon bucket, and this is money you're going to need in the next 3 to 9 years or so. So it's money you don't need right away, but you will need in the near future. Ideally, you're going to want to aim to have about 7 years worth of expenses saved up in this account. A good place to invest it would be in fixed income securities or low to moderate risk investments. You do want to capitalize on some gains, but you also want to ensure that that money is there for you when you need it. Because when it comes to investing, 3 to 9 years really isn't that long of a time horizon. Examples of where this money might be invested would include laddered CDs, which are CDs with staggered maturity dates. So say one matures this year, another one next year, another one the year after that, you get it. Or a bond fund, inflation protected bonds, or even a more aggressive investor might consider some exposure to solid blue chip stocks or even solid dividend paying stocks. But you do want to keep your exposure to stocks minimal in this category because stocks are more volatile. And remember, finance is personal. Everyone has their own type of risk tolerance. What is considered moderate risk for one person might be considered high risk to another. It's all personal. The final bucket is your later bucket, and this is money that you don't need for the next 7 to 10 years or so. Being that this is your long-term bucket, this is money that you can invest more aggressively. Theoretically, having that longer time horizon should mean that you can weather those turbulent market times, and if there is a downturn, you should have enough time to allow the market to recover before you need to touch that money. Also, having your money invested in equities and stocks and invested more aggressively will helpfully allow that money to continue growing, allowing your future self to have some money on hand for your later retirement years. Always a good thing. Some great examples of what you would invest in this bucket would be the total stock market fund or an S&P tracking index, perhaps some exposure to international markets. But remember, the very best thing you can do is not to make your retirement strategy overly complicated. Keep it simple. You don't need 10, 12, 30 funds in your portfolio. Just a handful and you're all set. No one wants to run out of money in retirement, and the 3-bucket strategy aims to prevent that. They're trying to keep you readily stocked with cash on hand today to cover all of today's expenses while keeping the bulk of your portfolio invested, growing, and hopefully producing future streams of income. So what would this 3-bucket strategy look like if we actually put it into use? Let's throw some numbers into the mix to find out. Let's say we have a retiree who has annual expenses of $50,000 a year. We'll also assume that he has $1 million saved up by the time he retires. What would his buckets look like? Bucket 1, cash, 2 years worth of expenses. Well, our retiree needs $50,000 a year to cover his expenses, so he's going to need $100,000 over the next 2 years. But he doesn't necessarily need $100,000 sitting in cash. There are some other accounts we have to factor in first. Being that 97% of our nation's retirees receive Social Security, it's safe to assume that our retiree here will also receive Social Security benefits. The typical Social Security payout is a little bit over $1,500 per month, but it can go over $3,000 a month. In our situation here, we're going to assume that our retiree gets a little bit over $1,600 a month or an even $20,000 a year, just to keep the numbers simple. Also, if you get any sort of pension, you would also want to factor that in here. Because remember, once you hit retirement, you can basically think of your pension as cash-like equivalents. In our situation, we are going to assume that our retiree does not have any sort of pension. While pensions were quite popular back in the day, they have become less and less available, as only 31% of Americans retiring today actually have a pension. So after factoring in Social Security and no pension, our retiree is going to need to have $60,000 saved up in his cash accounts to cover 2 years worth of living expenses. But because our retiree is smart, he is going to put it into a high yield savings account because he wants to capture as much of a return as he can while still being conservative and secure with this money. The anticipated return could be anywhere from 0.5%, maybe up to 1.5%, depending on the interest environment. Remember, the goal of this account is not growth, it is security, being able to cover all of your expenses for the next 2 years without having to worry about market performance. Bucket number 2, fixed income investments or lower risk investments. You are going to need up to 7 years worth of expenses in this bucket. Again, if you are expecting any sort of pension or Social Security, you're going to want to reduce the amount you are going to need every single year accordingly in these accounts. In our situation, that retiree is going to be expecting $20,000 a year from Social Security, so that leaves him with a $30,000 a year gap to get to his $50,000 a year need for expenses. So for 7 years worth of expenses, that is going to mean that he will want roughly $210,000 in fixed income investments or lower risk investments. Now, the investments in this type of account can vary, and they're going to vary based on your risk tolerance. If you run on the conservative side of the spectrum, maybe you're comfortable sticking with laddered CDs. However, if you have a more moderate risk approach, maybe you're comfortable approaching a bond fund. Funds like the Vanguard Core Bond Fund or the Vanguard High Yield Corporate Fund, which is going to be a little bit more aggressive. Or for those who are comfortable with even more risk, they may include some dividend paying stocks or some blue chip stocks in this bucket as well. However, the goal of this bucket is not primarily to hold stocks. The goal is to capture some growth, but do so at a reduced volatility. Now, when you put stocks in a portfolio, the more stocks you put in, the more volatile that portfolio is going to be. So if stocks do find their way into this bucket, you want them to be a smaller percentage. All in all, depending on the market and your own personal investment style and your own personal risk tolerance, the market return that you could expect in this bucket is about 4 to 6%. The goal of this bucket is conservative growth. You want to make sure that money is there when you need it in the near future. Bucket number 3, this is your later bucket. Now you can use higher growth, more volatile investments. Think stocks, because this is money that you're gonna need after 9 or 10 years or so. This is where the remainder of our retiree's investments are going to be held. In this case, remember our retiree has a nest egg worth $1 million. So if he has $60,000 in bucket 1, $210,000 in bucket 2, that is going to leave him with $730,000 in this bucket. Now, being that he isn't expecting to need these funds for at least 9 years or so, he can leave these funds invested more aggressively. Think like the Vanguard Total Stock Market Fund or the Fidelity Total Stock Market Fund, both of which have incredibly low fees and impressive long-term track records of growth. Now, while each of these funds do have 10-year average returns of around 16%, it is still probably a better idea to bank on the traditional long-term return of 10%, as we have been in a very impressive and a very long bull market. The goal with this bucket is growth. You want this money invested and earning returns so that the future you has a reliable income source. Yes, this bucket is going to be a volatile bucket, but that's the point. You have money in other buckets that you can draw on to pay for your immediate expenses. This bucket is not meant to be touched for many, many years. So should you suffer from a bear market, you can leave that money invested, you don't have to touch it, and you can leave it the time it needs to recover, because as we all know, markets do recover. That's why this is the long-term bucket. Now, as you've heard me say in this video and so many others, finance is personal. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. How you set up your buckets is up to you and your financial preferences. Perhaps you only want 1 year worth of cash in your now bucket. Maybe you want 3. When it comes to your soon bucket, maybe you don't want 7 years in there. Maybe you want more, maybe you want less. And also the type of investments that you have in your soon and your later bucket, that's up to you too. Remember, the 3 buckets are there as a guideline. They are not hard and fast rules. If you want to use this strategy, you have to make it work for you and your life. As with all withdrawal strategies, this one's not perfect. It does face some major criticisms as to when and from where are you supposed to refill these buckets. Does bucket 3 replenish 2 and 1, or does 3 only replenish bucket 2 and bucket 2 replenishes number 1? How often do you replenish? Do you do this annually? If you do it annually and you have a bear market and bucket 3 has suffered from a downturn, you're not actually protecting yourself from those downturns if you're withdrawing during a downturn. Or do you wait until a bucket is completely empty to refill it? All of these are fair questions. Also, the bucket strategy doesn't necessarily draw any attention to asset allocation or rebalancing. When should you rebalance, and how does that affect the holdings of the buckets? And also, the holdings of the buckets are more dictated by time frame rather than your personal lifestyle and your personal risk tolerance. However, with that said, I do think the 3 bucket strategy is a great retirement withdrawal strategy. Does it work for absolutely everyone? No. But at the end of the day, does any investment style work for absolutely everyone? Again, the answer is no. If this is a strategy you are interested in using, you would do yourself a great service in remembering that the buckets are there as guideposts. They are not meant to be followed exactly to a T 100% of the time. Be flexible with your finances and make it work for you. Remember, this is just one of many different retirement withdrawal strategies. If you're interested in other different retirement withdrawal strategies, let me know in the comments down below. I'd be happy to do videos on others. What do you guys think of the 3 bucket strategy? Have you heard of it before? Is it something you're interested in trying? Do you have a different strategy planned for your retirement? Or maybe it's too far off that you haven't really given much consideration to your withdrawal strategy. Let me know in the comments down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. Or if you know of someone who might get something out of this content, please consider sharing. I hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you soon. Bye.